Thank you, Jim. Well, here's how our story begins. I had it all. A beautiful wife, 3 vivacious little girls, the proverbial house with a fence, a new career, even a miniature schnauzer. I was living the picture-perfect American dream, yet I found myself in a perpetual free fall. With the world collapsing around me, a deep darkness infiltrated my soul. The real-life experience of Sean Macdonald is chronicled in Finding Me, My Walk Through Depression. I like the word through. Here from Indiana, but born in Kitchener, Ontario. Welcome, Sean.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Wow. This is a personal journal. Yes. And it's interesting, we started this week talking about dreams. Is it fair to say that in your experience, your dreams are linked to the depression that you experienced?
Yeah, I believe that would be fair. I think I had a certain concept or a certain vision of how my life was going to go. And a lot of that was based on, poor self-esteem. I thought if I could do this, which was be a preacher, that was I went to school for that. That's what I was trained for. Always striving to be that somebody. That if I can do this, I can actually become somebody. And so part of what I talk about is ultimately God just became a concept to me. Mm-hmm. And then
even as a youth pastor, you were somewhat living your dream at that point.
That's true.
You would say God was a concept. Where were the misconceptions coming from?
Part of where I think the misconceptions came from is I grew up in church. I went to church my whole life and went to Bible college. Always studied God. So, when you study God, God's supposed to do a certain thing. God's supposed to act, you can look at the scripture and, well, this is what God does. And then when God doesn't do exactly what you think he's supposed to do based on your study, it can kind of leave you in a place where you're like, whoa, okay, so you're supposed to do this, God, but you're doing this. And so it just led to the point where I was kind of disappointed with God, disappointed with what I thought he was doing, angry with him. I denied it a lot, that I was angry.
But if you dug right down, that's what was settled in.
Yeah, my wife saw it. My wife told me many times, you have issues here, and I think you're depressed. And I'd always look at her and say, I'm not depressed. I'm just an Eeyore in a world full of Tiggers, And so I ultimately found out that, I was depressed, and I did have some issues that I needed to deal with, and I was lost. I don't want to say lost as in, I knew God was, I knew Jesus had saved me and everything, but just I didn't really have that close relationship with him that you need to have.
Expectations comes out here.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Hope deferred makes the heart sick.
Yes.
It's interesting that one dream fulfilled is this book. You always wanted to write a book.
I did.
And I laughed when you wrote, you never got past, it was a dark and stormy night.
Yeah.
Until you had your dark and stormy night.
Yes. Where
did life become gridlocked when you were hospitalized?
I think what happened ultimately, that we talked about, I had a dream of being a youth pastor, and I started in a small church, and I think the dream was, just like everybody else, you want to advance in your career, you want to move up to a big church, but through a series of incidents, no fault to anybody, just some things happened at the church, and I left the church, and a lot of people had said some negative things about me, and that really hurt me. It hurt me deeply. And as I got out of the ministry, I thought, man, I've got some experience now. I'm going to get another church pretty quickly, and I sent hundreds of resumes out, never heard from anybody, and so I thought, okay, God, what are you doing? So we decided maybe I need to take another career path, and so what I started to do, I enrolled in school. After 20 years of being out of college, I went back to college to become a teacher, and all the time thinking to myself, this isn't really what I want to do. I really want to be in ministry. I really want to be doing this and doing that. But I went through and got my teaching license and got a job as a teacher and taught for a little over a year, but was just empty. I wake up dreading going to class. I'm sure a lot of students wake up dreading going to class, but I was the teacher dreading going to class. And it just wasn't, and that's where I hit rock bottom. I just knew something in me was gone, and I didn't know what it was. I didn't know how to find it, and I just felt totally lost. And so it was actually my wife who said to me, you know what, Sean, you've got some issues, and I'm going to take you to the hospital. And I fought her on that, but ultimately knew that, I mean, I could barely get out of bed in the morning. And so that's why I knew that.
How long were you in the hospital, and why was that helpful?
I was in the hospital for a week, a little over a week, but I took some group therapy sessions for about a month after that. I think what made it really helpful was the fact that I realized I wasn't alone. I think sometimes when you deal with depression, in fact, for me it was, you just felt alone, like nobody understood, nobody cared. You're just doing this whole thing alone. And it, especially as a Christian, you know, all these verses that talk about rejoice in the Lord and be joyful. And those verses actually became condemning for me because I wasn't that way. Yeah. And so I actually felt like a total failure as a pastor, as a husband, as everything. And what I found was, as I got into the hospital and met people who were just like me, normal people, you know, not the you know, all these alcoholics or whatever. No, they were just normal people who really struggled. And it helped me to see that yeah, this is a real life problem. It's not just me. And there are people out there who struggle with this. And it was very enlightening to me. In fact, I met somebody at the hospital who I never in my former life would have hung out with. You know, they were what I would consider the bad person, the tattooed and everything like that. And I'm not saying those are bad people.
I know.
But he was the greatest influence on my life.
A little rough around the edges, but authentic.
Exactly. And God just used him. He didn't even believe that necessarily that there was a God. But as we searched through these things, I realized, wow, God, you sent somebody into my life who I never would have met otherwise. And he challenged me. And I thought that was ironic. Just a lot of things. I mean, God's got a good sense of humor.
It's amazing how common that is.
Yeah.
Might be that schizophrenic woman in a lockdown who becomes the mother. I mean, I've heard these stories so many times. And I think the key is the authenticity and the love. Just there to love you and care with no facade. Interesting, I've got the top 10 fears of men here. I'll just work back from number 5. Poor health. Doesn't say what kind of health. Could be emotional health. The risk of financial loss. Been there. Not being a good husband or father. Appearing to need help is number 2. And then, of course, failure is the number 1 fear for men. So you had to get past all of those just to go in for help.
And I thought that fear of failure and asking for help, that's huge. I really thought that when I went into the hospital, I was going to be mocked and made fun of. And what I found was that people actually, my friends and anybody that I talked to said, wow, that was one of the bravest things I've heard you do. And I never understood that. Well, why is that brave? It's showing my failure. But I think it's like a man asking for directions. Okay, that hardly ever happens. You know, we'd rather drive 100 miles out of our way than ask for directions. But I think when you take the crumpled map and you lay it down and you say, you know what, I'm going to give this and I'm going to ask for help. I think people find that, like you say, authentic. I think they find it, wow, I can relate to that. That's what I need.
You actually say that your worldview was, if it's not perfect, you have failed. So, I mean, you had a long way, a lot of adjustment here. And you say you were still struggling to see the good in life.
Yeah.
1 month after coming out of the hospital, when the real crunch came.
Yes.
Your wife nearly died.
Yes, my wife went into the hospital for routine surgery. And I guess what I've learned is routine surgery isn't routine, no matter what. The doctor made a mistake, just a small little mistake. I guess he clipped an artery, and she was bleeding out. Now, my wife's a nurse, so she actually knew what was going on. And so I remember looking at her at one point, and they had to actually do an emergency surgery. And so I imagined, as she was coming out, I said, "It's going to be okay, honey," because I had to sign the papers for them to. And I looked, "It's going to be okay, honey." And she looked at me and she said, "No, I'm going to die." Because she knew. And that just totally broke me. I remember I left the hospital and there was a walking track behind the hospital. I found my way on it, and I just remember I was yelling at God. And ironically, there's an interstate that runs by the highway on the track, and I remember stopping and looking at those cars, and I was yelling at the cars. "What are you people doing? Don't you understand my wife is dying in here, and you're just going about your merry way?" And it was kind of there that God said, "You know what, Sean? You've kind of been doing the same thing. You just go through life totally oblivious. You're not helping people. You're not doing anything. How can you yell at those cars when you're doing the exact same thing? Do you know what's going on in those people's lives? Do you know how many of them are going to get to your destination?" And I remember that just floored me. It broke me. And I remember saying, "Okay, God, I don't know what's going to happen." Because I didn't. I didn't know if she was going to live or die. But I said, "I don't want you to take her, God. I don't want you to. But if you do, I understand you've got a plan." That was the first time I think I really just let go. And it was an amazing thing that came over me. Because I honestly thought she was going to die. In fact, the doctor called me back in and was doing that little pen clip, "Let me talk to you." And I'd seen ER and I'd seen Grey's Anatomy. I just figured he was practicing his "we did all we could" speech. But it was ironic in that moment. I said, "Okay, God, whatever happens, I know you're going to take care of me." And, well, obviously, I got a second chance. I know not everybody does, and I'm very thankful for that.
You're very honest about the transformation in your marriage.
Yes. Well, and it did. That made a huge, huge difference in my marriage. I think before that, Natalie and I had been just kind of going through the motions. I mean, I wouldn't say we disliked each other, but neither of us was taking time for the needs of each other, and I wasn't very good at it.
Lloyd John Ogilvie refers to this culture worshiping at the throne of the perpendicular pronoun, the big I. You have said the same in other words in your book. You were so focused on you.
And I didn't know that I was. I think that's part of the thing with depression, is that you don't know you're focused on yourself, but you really are.